Hey moms and dads, it's Dr. Scott back with the next module. So here we're going to talk about this process, this 5D algorithm that is happening in all of us. Especially when we talk about kids, we tend to see the evidence of this become something where it's really obvious. But in an adult, when you develop pain or if you're developing stress issues or immune issues, the process itself is still the same thing. So let's lay this out for you in detail. The first part starts with what we call a dyskinesia. Dyskinesia literally means loss of normal motion. We know that the spine and the extremities are built to move. If the spine stops moving the way that it's supposed to, there is an instant disruption in its input ability to the brain. Dyskinesia, kinetics, literally is a study of motion. Dyskinesia is a disruption in normal motion. At the level of the spine, you'll hear us use this term subluxation. Subluxation is two factors. It's misalignment coupled with loss of normal motion. The effect of that then is interference between the brain's and the body's ability to communicate the way that they're supposed to. We know that that dyskinetic state, the loss of motion from the spine, creates a process, an algorithm that starts to disrupt the way that our children's brains or our brains work. When we have the dyskinesia, part one, it will lead into what is called disafferentation. Disafferentation literally means abnormal input. It's kind of like when you talk on your cell phone and there's static in the signal. Very similarly, if the nerves are not sending the input to the brain the way they're supposed to, then in turn, then the brain cannot properly process it. So let's put this in context. So for those of you who get headaches, you probably can relate to this. If you've ever had a headache so bad that it made you feel nauseous, right? Like that problem, is that a nerve problem or is that a stomach problem? Well, realistically, it's a nerve problem, right? Because if you didn't eat anything, there's nothing you took into your body to make you nauseous, then it's a problem with the input from the nerve that goes into the stomach coming up to the brain, and then the output control problem, right, is a result. Disafferentation is a problem with the input signal to the brain, and in turn the output is the stomach feels sick. Well, that could be reflux, it could be constipation, it could be any number of different things as a byproduct of areas of the spine incorrectly sending the signals to the brain. It could even be something like ear drainage issues. If the brain can't get the signals into the muscles that drain the inner ear correctly, then you won't drain. And you'll have constant issues with congestion, you'll have constant issues with backup, you'll have constant issues with ear pain, you'll have constant sinus issues because it's a pumping mechanism that uses muscles. If you disrupt it, it's going to be affected. What ends up happening, though, is that if there's interference, especially volume-wise, the highest level of interference, the highest volume is at the top of the spine up here between the base of the skull, the first and the second vertebra. We call those the main breaker. But any area of the spine that stops moving creates disafferentation. The more disafferentation there is, then it triggers this process that we will call a dysautonomia. Now, there are varying types, varying degrees, and varying severities of dysautonomias, but what you have to understand is the autonomic nervous system is how the brain outwardly controls the body. That is the fight or flight system called the sympathetic, or the rest, digest, growth, development, and healing system called the parasympathetic. If the process of disafferentation goes on long enough, it will trigger a dysregulation or imbalance in autonomic function called a dysautonomia. And so what we tend to see is that when there is a long-term sustained fight or flight response, it comes from 3 T's, right? The thoughts, traumas, toxins, triggering dyskinesia. The dyskinesia then triggers a disafferent response. And in turn, the brain wires into fight or flight mode. And so we get this imbalance in the brain's ability to properly handle and process stressors. And so in turn, when we look at our scans, we tend to see that there is a lot more fight or flight response than what there should be, whether it's a child or an adult. Over time, what this does is it progressively will wear us down. In kids, what we'll see is that they'll have these really profoundly high energy levels, or they'll have issues with focus and attention, but there can be issues that translate later on into then maybe an adult with chronic headaches, or constipation issues that last for a long period of time. Or it can be fatigue, because the brain can only manage a stress response for so long before it starts to wear down. So whether you're a child who's you have a child that's having a more acute stress response in the first 10 years of life, or you've got a tween teen that's starting to transition, all of a sudden their tone, their energy, and their mood are going down, they're starting to take on worse and worse posture, it's the brain's inability to mount the fight. The dysautonomia is wearing them down, and in turn you're starting to see the downturn in energy and mood. Or you as an adult, you've been dealing with some prolonged health issues because the brain's never gotten out of fight or flight, so maybe you deal with chronic pain, chronic stress, chronic sleep issues, whatever it might be. And so when we talk about that dysautonomia, the dysautonomia gone long enough is when, especially in kids, we see this thing that we call dyskinesis. Dyskinesis, when we look at our scans, especially on the surface EMG scans, we call them errors in energy expenditure and output. Okay? What that literally means is if you have a child who has ADHD, it's the hyperactivity component. If you see a kid that has autism, it's the non-stop overdrive, hyperactivity, issues with self-regulation. It's other kids. It can be things like temperament issues. So in you moms and dads, it can be issues with chronic levels of stress, inability to sleep, chronic immune challenges. It can be all of these symptoms that have mounted after years and years and years and years of this pattern of overload of the stress division of the nervous system, inability of the brain to go into growth and development mode and heal like you should, or like your child should. In certain cases, gone long enough, what this will lead to is nervous system, what they call disconnection. Now, when we talk about things like ADHD, ADD, certain types of Asperger's and autism and things like that, what is present is a disconnection between the right side and the left side of the brain, what they call hemispheric imbalances. What you need to understand, very simply, is one side of the brain to the other side of the brain, they're not in sync. So the longer that we go down this road of the 5D process, the more disconnected the two sides of the brain become. So if you have a child who has ADHD, very commonly what's happened is the left side of the brain is working too hard, the right side of the brain is not doing enough, and the goal is to catch it up. If you are an adult who deals with those kinds of issues, right, you probably had a long-standing issue where the left side of your brain is overpowering the right side, and you may be someone who dealt with focus and attention and memory issues and anxiety issues your whole life. And it's this chronic imbalance that may have been there since you were a child. So if you are someone who has a child that's got temperament issues, right? Same thing. So chronic imbalance, right side, left side, inability to regulate oneself. Because what we know about the way the two sides of the brain works is the left side of the brain is technically the accelerator, the right side is the brake pedal. Well, when we use these gas versus brake analogies, that's the reason why. Because when the brain is in balance, the brain is able to manage how we respond to stress, regulate the immune system, keep things in balance. So in turn, what that turns into is proper behavior, proper development, proper health. The brain and the body working the way that it is supposed to. When things get out of balance, we tend to see any and all of those things potentially go downhill. Now, when you talk about the process of the care plan, one of the reasons we want you to understand this is because what the adjustment does is it helps to back the brain out of this process. Every adjustment is a momentum building process, walking the brain from the state of disconnection into a state of reconnection. It's helping to improve the dyskinesis, helping to improve the way that we use energy, the way that we expend energy, the way that our brain is functioning, and it helps the brain then to back down out of the dysautonomia, so it re-regulates the autonomic nervous system. This is why the scans are so valuable to us. And then each adjustment also improves input to the brain. And the input to the brain can only improve by getting rid of the dyskinesia. So this whole process is a process of rewiring the brain by backing it through the algorithm in the opposite direction. Reconnection by getting rid of the dyskinesis, by calming the dysautonomia, by improving input to the brain, by getting rid of the dyskinesia. Hope this is helpful, moms and dads, but this core part of the algorithm is really crucial to understanding the importance of why care works the way that it does, why we get the kind of results that we're going to with you or your child, and how the brain is going to heal. All right, I'll see you in the next video.